Chosen one, God said, this message must disappear. After you've seen it all, what if you were only ever going to get one chance to hear this, and once it's finished, it disappears completely, leaving only whatever you managed to carry forward from it? What if the reason this message feels so different from everything else you've watched tonight is because it wasn't meant to be watched twice? It was meant to be received once, fully, and acted on immediately. I want you to give this your complete attention right now, because after this, it's gone. Not the video itself, but the exact window this message is speaking into. That window closes the moment you finish watching. Whether you act on it or not, are you ready to receive this fully, knowing you won't get another chance quite like this one? You've probably gotten used to consuming things passively, haven't you? Watching, nodding along, feeling something for a moment, and then moving on to the next thing without ever actually letting it change anything real in your life. Message after message passes through you like water through your hands, momentarily felt, quickly forgotten, leaving you exactly where you started. And somewhere underneath that pattern, there's an exhaustion you don't talk about much. The quiet frustration of feeling moved by things constantly, without ever actually being transformed by any of them. Have you noticed how many meaningful messages have passed through your life without actually changing anything? Simply because you assumed you'd always get another chance to revisit them later. Why some moments are not meant to be repeated. Here's something worth understanding clearly. Not every meaningful moment in life is designed to be revisited. Some are designed to be received fully, once, in a way that requires your complete attention, precisely because repetition isn't guaranteed. That urgency isn't cruelty. It's actually a kind of respect for how transformation genuinely happens. Not through passive repetition, but through full, present engagement in a single, undivided moment. Have you been treating meaningful moments as replaceable, assuming you could always revisit them later if you missed something the first time? Why? You've been waiting for a sign that looks different than this one. Think honestly about what you've been expecting a genuine spiritual message to look like. Something dramatic, something undeniable, something that arrives with obvious certainty attached to it. And because this message doesn't match that exact expectation, some part of you might be tempted to dismiss it as just another video, rather than recognizing it as exactly the kind of quiet, ordinary moment where real messages actually tend to arrive. Have you been waiting for a dramatic sign while dismissing quieter, more ordinary moments that might have actually been exactly what you were asking for? If this is landing somewhere real in you, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because part 2 goes even deeper into exactly what to do once this message is gone. Why this disappearing feeling forces you to actually listen. Here's something worth understanding about why the sense of urgency in this specific message matters. When something feels permanent, always available, easy to return to, human attention naturally relaxes. But when something feels genuinely limited, urgent, unlikely to repeat itself, focus sharpens completely. That sharpened focus is exactly what's needed right now. Because what's being asked of you tonight requires your full presence, not your distracted, half-attentive awareness. Can you feel your own attention sharpening right now? Simply because you understand this message won't simply wait for you indefinitely. Why? You've been postponing the exact thing this message is about. Here's something worth sitting with honestly. Somewhere in your life right now, there's a decision, a conversation, a change you've been quietly delaying, telling yourself you'll get to it eventually, when the timing feels more convenient. This message, arriving with this specific sense of urgency, is speaking directly into that exact delay. It's asking you to stop assuming later will always be available, and to recognize that the moment to act might genuinely be now. What have you been postponing, telling yourself you'd get to it eventually, that this message might actually be pointing toward right now? Why God often speaks through urgency rather than comfort. Here's something worth understanding deeply. Comfort rarely produces change. Urgency does. Throughout history, the most significant turning points in people's lives rarely arrived through gentle, comfortable nudges that could easily be ignored. They arrived through moments that demanded immediate attention, moments that made clear the cost of continued delay. This message's urgency isn't manipulation. It's precisely the kind of wake-up call that genuine transformation has always required. Has comfort ever actually produced real change in your life? Or has meaningful change always required some degree of urgency to finally break through? If this reframe is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because Part 2 continues exploring exactly what to do with this urgency once you've received it. Why you don't need to understand everything to act on this tonight. Here's something worth releasing right now: the need to fully understand every detail of this message before you're willing to act on it. Sometimes genuine faith requires responding to what you've received, even without complete clarity about every implication. Waiting for full understanding before taking action often becomes just another way to delay indefinitely. Tonight isn't asking for complete comprehension. It's asking for genuine response. Are you willing to act on what you've received tonight, even without needing to fully understand every detail of it first? Why this message disappearing isn't about the video itself. Here's something worth clarifying honestly. The video itself, technically, might remain accessible. But the exact moment this message is speaking into, your current state of readiness, your current openness, your current willingness to actually receive and respond rather than passively consume, that moment is genuinely limited. It's not the content that disappears. It's the specific window of receptivity you're standing inside of right now. And that window doesn't reopen simply by re-watching the same words later. Do you understand now that it's not the video disappearing, but this exact moment of your own readiness that won't simply repeat itself later? Truth for tonight: this message was never meant to be background noise, easily revisited later whenever convenient. It was meant to meet you exactly where you are right now, in this exact moment of readiness, asking you to respond genuinely rather than passively consume and move on. What you do in the next few minutes after this message ends matters more than almost anything else you'll do tonight. If you truly believe this window of readiness wouldn't simply reopen later, what would you actually do differently the moment this message ends? You've spent so long assuming meaningful messages would always be available to revisit later, whenever it became more convenient to actually engage with them. But this exact moment, this exact window of readiness, doesn't work that way. It's here right now, fully, completely, and what you do with it in the next few minutes matters more than you've allowed yourself to believe. This is only part 1. Part 2 goes deeper into exactly what to do the moment this message ends, and how to carry this urgency forward into real, lasting change. If this message reached something real in you tonight, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because Part 2 continues exactly where this left off. This moment won't repeat itself. Act on it now, In part 1, we talked about the urgency of this exact moment, the readiness you're standing inside of right now, and why this specific window of receptivity won't simply reopen later the way you might assume. So today, let's go further. Now that you understand the urgency, what do you actually do with it? How do you make sure this message doesn't become just another thing you felt deeply for 5 minutes, and then quietly let fade back into your ordinary routine? Are you ready to learn how to actually carry this forward? Here's what tends to happen even after someone feels genuinely moved by an urgent message. The intensity fades within hours, sometimes within minutes, as ordinary life reasserts itself, pulling attention back toward errands, distractions, and habitual patterns. That fade isn't a personal failure. It's simply how human attention naturally works. Unless something intentional is done to anchor the message before that fading begins. Have you ever felt deeply moved by something, only to notice that intensity completely evaporate within hours as ordinary life pulled your attention back? Why? The first 5 minutes after this message matter more than you realize. Here's something worth understanding clearly. The period immediately following a genuinely urgent, meaningful message is when its impact is at its absolute peak. Whatever you do in the next 5 minutes, write something down, make a decision, send a message you've been avoiding, simply sit in silence and truly absorb what you've heard. That action anchors the message in a way that waiting even an hour significantly weakens. Urgency has a shelf life, and it's shorter than most people assume. What could you do in the next 5 minutes right now to anchor this message before its intensity naturally begins to fade? Why writing something down makes it real in a way thinking alone never does. Here's something practical worth doing immediately. Write down, in your own words, exactly what this message asked you to face, decide, or change. That physical act of writing transforms an abstract feeling into something concrete, something you can return to later, even after the initial emotional intensity has faded. Thoughts alone are slippery, easily forgotten or reshaped by time. Words written down in the moment capture exactly what you understood, exactly when you understood it most clearly. Have you written down what this message specifically asked of you, or is it still floating as an unanchored feeling in your mind? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because part 3 goes even deeper into sustaining this urgency long after tonight. Why telling someone else makes this harder to abandon later? Here's something worth considering seriously. Sharing what you've just received with at least one other person creates a kind of accountability that private, internal commitment rarely achieves on its own. Once you've spoken it aloud to someone else, quietly abandoning it later becomes harder, because now someone else knows what you intended to do. That accountability isn't about performing for others. It's about strengthening your own follow-through through genuine, spoken commitment. Is there someone you could tell right now about what this message asked of you, creating real accountability for following through? Waiting for the perfect moment to act usually means never acting at all. Here's a trap worth recognizing immediately: the temptation to wait for a more convenient moment to actually act on what you've just received. Tomorrow morning, next week, once things settle down a bit. That waiting, disguised as reasonable patience, is often simply how urgent messages quietly get abandoned entirely. The perfect moment to act rarely arrives on its own. It has to be chosen deliberately, often in the middle of ordinary, imperfect circumstances exactly like tonight. Are you tempted to wait for a more convenient moment, when tonight, right now, imperfect as it is, might actually be exactly the moment to act. Why this message might have arrived specifically. Because you were finally ready. Here's something worth considering with genuine hope. If this message has landed with this much intensity tonight, it might be arriving precisely because you've finally reached a point of readiness that didn't exist in you before. Maybe you've encountered similar messages previously and dismissed them. But something in you has shifted enough that tonight this specific message actually broke through in a way earlier ones couldn't. That readiness is worth honoring by actually following through, rather than letting this become another missed opportunity. What do you think has shifted in you recently that made you finally ready to receive this message the way you have tonight? If this reflection is meaningful to you, that's exactly why this series was written. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever your next chapter needs this kind of momentum. Wasmal. Immediate action matters more than Allah delayed plan. Here's something worth understanding clearly. You don't need an elaborate, fully developed plan in order to honor this message tonight. You simply need one small immediate action, taken right now, that genuinely moves you in the direction this message pointed toward. A single text sent. A single boundary finally spoken. A single decision finally made. Even in rough, unfinished form. That small immediate action matters infinitely more than an elaborate plan you intend to develop and execute later. What single small action could you take right now, tonight, rather than developing an elaborate plan you intend to execute at some future point? Why revisiting this feeling tomorrow won't be the same as acting on it tonight? Here's something worth being honest about. You might genuinely intend to revisit this feeling tomorrow, to follow through once you've had more time to think it over. But tomorrow's version of this feeling will already be diluted, filtered through a full night's sleep, through ordinary distractions, through the natural fading that happens to even the most intense emotional experiences. Tonight's clarity, exactly as it exists right now, is genuinely different from whatever remains of it tomorrow. Can you act tonight, honoring the clarity you have right now, rather than assuming tomorrow's diluted version will be just as effective? Truth, for today the intensity of this message, right now, is at its absolute peak, and it will only diminish from here unless you anchor it through immediate, concrete action. Writing it down, telling someone, taking one small, immediate step. These aren't just suggestions. They're the actual mechanism through which urgent messages become lasting transformation instead of forgotten feelings. If you took one genuine, immediate action right now, before this feeling fades, what do you think that single action would actually be? You've learned something today that transforms tonight's urgency into something that can actually last. That the first 5 minutes after a meaningful message matter more than you realized. That writing something down and telling someone else creates real accountability. And that small immediate action always outperforms an elaborate plan for later. Acts now. Anchor this. Don't let tonight's clarity dissolve into tomorrow's forgotten feeling. There's more ahead. Part 3 goes into what happens days and weeks from now, and how to make sure this message's impact actually lasts long term. If this message is helping you move forward, subscribe now, because Part 3 continues exactly where this left off. Acts now. This moment is at its peak right now. The moment 3 days ago you didn't realize was the first contact. What if the very first contact didn't actually happen tonight at all, but 3 days ago, in a moment so small and ordinary that you completely missed it was happening? What if there's a specific instant, still sitting somewhere in your recent memory, that you dismissed as nothing at the time, but was actually the very first knock on a door you've only just now finally opened? I want you to go back with me right now, 3 days into your own memory, and let's find that exact moment together. Because once you see it clearly, you'll never be able to unsee how long this has actually been trying to reach you. You've been assuming, probably, that this entire experience began recently, suddenly, out of nowhere. But most genuine contact like this doesn't actually start with the dramatic moment you finally notice. It starts earlier, quieter, in a small detail so easy to dismiss that you likely didn't even register it as anything worth remembering. And because you missed that first gentle attempt, you've spent these past few days feeling like this all came out of nowhere, when really, it's been building toward you for longer than you realized. Has anything felt like it's been building for a few days now? Something you can't quite place the beginning of? Why the first contact is always the quietest one? Here's something worth understanding clearly. The very first attempt to reach someone is almost never the loudest or most dramatic. It's the quietest, the easiest to miss, precisely because it's testing the waters, offering the gentlest possible nudge before anything more direct becomes necessary. If you go back honestly through the last several days, there's likely a moment that felt slightly unusual, slightly out of place, that you brushed past without a second thought. Think back 3 days. Was there a moment, a strange thought, an unusual feeling, a small coincidence, that felt slightly out of place, even if you dismissed it immediately? Why sleep disruptions often mark the begin? Here's something worth examining honestly. Many people, looking back at when something like this actually began, realize their sleep shifted first, waking at an unusual hour for no clear reason, a dream that felt more vivid and significant than ordinary dreams, difficulty settling into rest the way you normally would. Those disruptions are often the earliest, subtlest marker that something has begun trying to get your attention, long before you consciously recognized what was happening. Has your sleep felt different in any way over the past few nights, waking at odd hours or experiencing dreams that felt unusually vivid? If this is landing somewhere real in you, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because more of these truths are waiting for whenever your next season needs this kind of clarity. Why? A specific person or conversation might have been the actual messenger. Here's something worth reflecting on carefully. Sometimes the first contact doesn't feel supernatural at all. It arrives disguised as an ordinary conversation with an ordinary person, someone who said something slightly too specific, slightly too relevant to what you needed to hear, without any way of actually knowing your situation. If a particular conversation from the past few days keeps replaying in your mind, unprompted, that repetition itself is worth taking seriously. Has a specific conversation from the past few days kept replaying in your mind, unprompted, more than an ordinary conversation usually would? Why you dismissed it at the time, and why that makes sense. Here's something worth extending yourself grace about. It makes complete sense that you dismissed this first contact when it happened. You weren't yet in the specific state of stillness and readiness that eventually allowed this entire message to fully land. That first, quieter attempt was simply preparing the ground, testing whether you were ready, before the more direct approach that eventually caught your full attention. Missing the first attempt isn't failure. It's simply how this kind of gradual, patient reaching usually unfolds. Can you extend yourself grace for missing that first, quieter attempt, understanding it was simply preparing you for what came next. Why recognizing this pattern now changes how you'll naughty it next time. Here's something valuable worth carrying forward. Now that you can trace this experience back to its actual quiet beginning 3 days ago, you've learned something important about how this kind of contact typically unfolds in your own life specifically. The next time something similar begins, you'll likely recognize the quiet, early signs far sooner, rather than needing it to escalate all the way to the more obvious, unmistakable moment before you finally pay attention. How will recognizing this pattern change the way you notice similar quiet beginnings the next time something tries to reach you? If this recognition feels valuable to you, that's exactly why this series was written. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever your next chapter needs this kind of awareness. Why this timeline matters more than just curiosity. Here's something worth understanding about why tracing this timeline actually matters, beyond simple curiosity. It reveals the patience and consistency of whatever has been trying to reach you. 3 days of gentle, persistent attempts, growing gradually clearer until you finally paid full attention, demonstrates a level of faithful persistence that deserves real recognition. This wasn't a single random moment. It was a deliberate, sustained effort specifically directed at you. Does it change how you feel about this experience? Recognizing 3 consistent days of persistent effort rather than a single isolated moment. Why looking back like this builds your faith for what's ahead? Here's something worth carrying forward as this reflection continues. The exercise of tracing this experience back to its actual beginning does more than satisfy curiosity. It builds genuine faith and confidence for future experiences, giving you concrete evidence, drawn from your own recent memory, that this kind of guidance is real, patient, and consistently present in your life. That evidence becomes something you can return to whenever doubt tries to creep back in later. How does having this concrete, 3-day timeline strengthen your confidence in trusting similar experiences in the future? The final truth for today: this entire experience didn't begin tonight. It began quietly, 3 days ago, through a small sign you dismissed, a sleep disruption you brushed past, a conversation that felt slightly too specific to be coincidental. That patient, gradual build-up reveals something significant about the faithfulness of whatever has been trying to reach you, consistently, gently, until you were finally ready to fully receive it. If you now understood this entire experience as a patient, 3-day process rather than a single sudden moment, how would that change your confidence in trusting whatever comes next? You've learned something today that deepens your understanding of this entire journey. That first contact rarely arrives loudly, that it often shows up through sleep disruptions, unusual conversations, and small, easily dismissed signs, and that recognizing this quiet beginning builds real confidence for whatever similar experience comes your way next. Stay attentive to the quiet beginnings, not just the loud arrivals. If this message reached something real in you today, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because more of these messages are coming exactly when you need them most. It started quietly 3 days ago. Now you finally see the whole picture.